Hi, I'm Lisa Niven Kelly for Beaducation.com. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a wrapped loop dangle using head pins and a bead. So, are you wondering, what's a head pin? Head pin is just a wire with a head at the bottom. Sometimes they're flat like a nail, sometimes there's a ball at the bottom, and sometimes they're decorative. So today we're going to teach you how to take a head pin, slide a bead on, turn a loop, and wrap it. And this makes great dangles for necklaces or earrings, or to add to a chain, or to add to a stamped pendant. We see a lot of that to add a little color, maybe a birthstone or a pearl. If you like this class though, you might want to pop on over to the Wire Jewelry Fundamentals, where we teach more about wrap loops, how to do it on either side of a bead to build a chain, and so forth. So let's get started with wrapped dangles. Here are the tools and materials that we're going to use in today's class. We're going to use some craft wire to practice with, so have lots of that on hand. I like to use 24 gauge. We need some head pins, and the gauge head pin that you use is going to be determined by the hole of the bead that you use. Typically 24 gauge will work unless it's a really fine drilled gemstone. You might have to bump down to a smaller gauge, but again, the gauge there will depend on the hole of your bead. So we've got some beads, got some head pin, some wire to practice with, and these are the pliers we're going to use. You're going to use your round nose for making the loops. We're going to use a pointed chain nose and a nice pointy flush cutter. When choosing a head pin for this design, whether you choose plain or a balled head pin, I just wanted to point out I really like the way the balled head pins look. It gives a little decoration at the bottom. You can make your own balled head pins by checking out our free Making Your Own Balled Head Pins class. So first we're going to start practicing making this wrapped dangle. And you can see here, I'm not going to practice with head pins because head pins are not free and not all that cheap. So we're just going to use some craft wire, and I'm going to kind of fake it and make a little kink at the bottom of the wire. Can you see that right down there? And I'm going to use that as a head pin as I practice. So grab some 24 gauge inexpensive craft wire, and we're going to practice with that. Okay, let's start making some wrapped dangles. I'm going to wrap this pearl on this wire. But first I need to make a little kink at the end of the wire that will act like a head of a head pin. I'm going to do that with my chain nose. I'm just going to grab the tip. See the little tip right there, just holding the smallest amount I can with the smallest amount of my chain nose, and just bend it up and over like you're making a basic loop. And then come in and smash it down. Okay, so this is just for practice. This makes it so we can use this inexpensive wire and pretend like it's a head pin. Slide on your bead. Bring it on down. All right, so here comes the important stuff. The first step is to hold the wire right up against the bead at the base, and I'm holding it with a spot on my plier that's about 1 to 1.5 millimeters thick. I'm going to bend that top wire against my plier, give it a 90-degree angle. See that right there? Now that little space that I just created right there is perfect for the wraps, and that's going to come after we make our loop. The loop is made with round nose pliers, so I'm going to come in and grab the wire right as close to the bead as I can. See, I'm outside there. I'm going to grab this top wire, pressing it nice and tight against the plier, bring it all the way around. Now I'm going to shift my pliers so that I can move them. I'm going to continue, bring the wire underneath, and now roll that loop so it sits completely centered on the pin. See that? So now we're ready to grab this loop with our chain nose and make our wraps. I like to grab the loop with my chain nose and hold it in my left hand. It's my stabilizing hand. I'm going to do the wrapping with my right hand. So remember, you want to hold this loop with your chain nose, not your round nose. Your round nose will put kinks in the wire. And with my hand here, I'm going to use good tension, pulling the wire nice and tight against the core wire there and getting my coils right next to each other. Nice and tight until my space is filled up. Then I'm going to stop, come around, and now is where we trim with the very tip of your flush cutters. So that's why I really like these pointed cutters, because I can get into a very, very tight spot and trim. If the tail is at all poking out, you're going to come back in with the tip of your chain nose and just squeeze it down. Let's run through that one more time, but I want to make sure that you do a lot of practicing with your craft wire before you move on to your balled or regular head pins, because they cost money and you need to practice on something inexpensive. I want to see you practice at least 10 or 15 times before you move on to this guy. All right, so I'm holding it again with the tip of my chain nose and giving it a little bend. Coming in with my round nose, holding it out here. I'm going to make a slightly larger loop this time and grab it. There we go. Bring the wire up and around, pushing it nice and snug against your tool. Now I'm going to shift my tool so that I can grab it and go a little bit more at the tail and a little bit more with the rolling of the tool. You can do a little of each until you get there. There is your loop sitting right on, centered on the pin. So I'm going to come in now and hold it with my chain nose, nice and flat. Again, not holding this with my round nose. Now if you're using a head pin that is kind of short and you're not able to grab it with your hand when you go to do the wrapping, then you're going to need a second tool to hold it here. Another chain nose or flat nose is great, but if you only have what I call the power 3, the chain nose, the flush cutter, and a round nose, you can use the round nose to hold it here. Now again, whenever you hold wire with the round nose, it mars it, so hold way out at the end where it's the waist that you're going to cut off. That's not going to be a big deal if it's all marred up. So I'm going to come up and around. Now when using a tool, you need to shift to come up and under, around, and I'm almost there. My last wrap right there. Okay, so I'm going to take it off and come in with my flush cutter. Get right in that little spot. Sorry, I'm having a hard time holding it here. There we go. And snip. Now you can see where I snipped it here because I was struggling. I left a really long tail. I don't have room to burnish that tail down and tuck it in, so I'm actually going to go in at a different angle to snip it. Better. Okay. Just that littlest tiny bit though. I can squeeze down. Be careful at this point that you don't smack your crystal. If you're making a wrap dangle that you want to add to chain, whether you're adding it right in the middle of the chain or at the very end of the chain, you need to know when to add that chain. Well, the time is now. I've already kinked it and I've brought the loop around with my round nose, but I've not yet wrapped. Once you've wrapped, you're at the point of no return and it's secure and shut, which is why we like this technique, but you need to add your chain in first. So you want to open this like you would a jump ring. So let me show you with my hand here. You don't want to open it like this, where you'll distort the loop. You want to open it like this, to the side, right? So pull it to one side or the other. It's going to turn it this way, and with my chain nose, actually I'm going to turn it this way. With my chain nose, I'm just going to grab this slightly and pull it out just a little bit. Not much, just enough to slide the chain in. So that little bit of space. Bring your chain around, let it come up into the loop. Now you're going to come in with your chain nose and ignore the chain. Let it dangle off the side. You don't want to clamp it down on your chain nose with the loop because you could kind of mess up your loop. So ignore it, let it sort of hang there. And then come around here and do your wraps. pick up space for one more right there. Okay. So you might be wondering how long a head pin to start with. Good rule of thumb, and I usually start with about 1.5 inch head pin. But here's what you need to think about. Once you slide on your bead, whatever size bead you're using is going to take up that amount of space. So this is a 4mm bead. It's going to take up 4 millimeters of my head pin. And typically, if you're making a basic size loop, the loop will consume 1/2 inch of wire, and then those wraps will consume 1/2 inch of wire, and you want a little bit of wire to hang on to. So we'd be sitting pretty with this head pin. If I was using a bead that was, about this big, then I'd have to bump it up to a larger head pin to have space to make my loop and to wrap it. So let's do a little bit of problem solving here. Does this look familiar to you? This is one where I turn my loop and I'm ready to wrap, but my loop is not centered on the wire that continues down to the head of the pin. So don't wrap this guy. Let's fix it before adding the wraps. How I'm going to fix it is I'm going to come in with my round nose, put it back on that same spot, and I'm going to rock it forward to get it centered. If you need to sort of undo the tail a little bit, that's fine. So I'm sort of stealing from one and giving from the other, so that now before I wrap it, it's perfectly centered on my pin. All right, here is another tip. Do you see on the right side of this loop how it's flattened and kind of smashed? That's because when I was making my loop, and maybe this happened to you, I gave it a death grip with the round nose. So because of the dynamics of the way the round nose come together, they will completely mar up your wire if you're squeezing really hard. So just hold the wire enough to move it. Sometimes when you're starting a new technique, beginners tend to really squeeze. Not only are you going to mar it up, but you can flatten the wire enough there that it'll snap, and that just doesn't look pretty. So let's lighten up on the grip of your round nose. If ever you are cranking out a bunch of these and you need to make sure that the loops are all even, let's say for instance like a pair of earrings, then come in with a Sharpie and mark your round nose where you're going to be making your loop, so that after you make the first one, you can come right on top of that line to make the second one, and you'll have consistent loops. Holy moly, my friends, that is not a good looking loop. How do I fix a messed up loop like this? So let's say this happened to you and you thought that everything was correct in the process, you wrapped it, you pulled it off, and it wasn't looking so good. You have one more chance to problem solve that. And what I do is I take a long round nose because they have wider jaws, and I will thread my loop on there and sort of press it up as I'm pushing this up here, and hopefully this is going to round it out a little better. Yes, I'm very pleased with that. That's much better.